This video tutorial is compatible with Photoshop CC and Photoshop CS6. In this project we're going to create a panoramic image from 5 raw images. I've got the images open inside of Photoshop CS6 and I'm just going to come up to the window menu, choose Arrange and then Tile All vertically. We get a good idea now that these 5 raw images will actually stitch. Just going to move number 5. It's come down over the right there, so let's just move him over to the side there. Okay, now we've got that panoramic image playing out. We can actually see that there's probably about a 50% overlap between these images. These images have actually been worked inside of Adobe Camera Raw just to create this sort of even color and tone running through. Once you've got that sorted, then we're really ready to implement the Photomerge feature. Okay, I'm just going to close all of these images, File, Close All, and I'll apply to all and don't save. Okay, now let's come to the Photomerge feature. We'll come to the File, Automate, and choose Photomerge. Now it's going to ask me to browse to the files that I want to merge together, so I'll just click on that Browse button there. And I'm coming to my composites folder where I'm keeping all of the images for this chapter, and I'm just going to choose the 5 Cape Woolamai images that I shot on Phillip Island just off the coast of Australia. Okay, so I've got the images and I'll select Open, and these are added to the file list 1 to 5. Now I'm going to click on the Blend Images Together. Now I've already done some work inside of Adobe Camera Raw, so I don't need to do the vignette or geometric distortion correction at this stage, which will refer to the lens data inside each of these files. So we're going to go with the Auto option. It'll probably choose the cylindrical option here, which generally is what happens when you were choosing more than 3 files. So we'll just select the OK and let Photomerge figure it out. Okay, it's going to have to process each of the files from the Camera Raw file, so this will take just a little bit longer had we already processed the files as TIFF, PSD or JPEG files. Going to work with a slightly lower resolution image than the default 10 or 12 megapixel image that this sensor captured, just because I don't need quite such a large panorama. If you want Photomerge to work with this smaller resolution, just set your workflow options inside of Adobe Camera Raw to a lower resolution before applying the Photomerge feature. Okay, now that it's aligned the images, you can see the progress. It's starting to blend the images together and creating mask for a seamless composition. And we'll go out and open up the layers panel so we can see indeed this is actually what it has done. It has selected portions from each of the 5 images, and with these masks, I'll just option click on one of these masks or alt click. You'll see that it's woven its edge of its mask between detail within the image, and this allows for that seamless composition. As you can see, it's working its way around various rocks in this composition here. Okay, one of the things that you can't really do with once that Photomerge is finished with these individual layers is actually rework the masks. The seamless composition is created by Photoshop working on the color and tonal values inside of the images. If we start erasing or adding to the masks, then we're going to notice that the pixels behind the mask area has not actually been modified, and so we're going to create some color or tonal differences in these areas. So really there's nothing to be done with these images other than pretty much flattening the image or merging visible. And we could use the keyboard shortcut Command Shift E or Control Shift E on a PC to merge visible. Okay, we're going to get rid of the transparency. We could just crop the image smaller, or we can try our hand at the ContentAware Phil, which often gets these type of problems sorted with very few errors. Okay, so let's just select a tool from the Tools panel. I'll select the Magic Wand tool. Now I'm going for a sample size of 5 by 5 average, tolerance 20, and what we're going to do is we're going to select the contiguous option. This allows me to select in any of the transparent areas, and it'll run around the image looking for other transparent pixels to select. Now, in order for ContentAware Phil to have a reasonable chance of success, we just need to create a small overlap. So we need to extend the selection a small way into the image area itself. And we can do this by going to the Select menu, coming down to Modify, and then choosing Expand. I'll choose a value of around 20 pixels. You'll need to increase this if you're working on much higher resolution files than I'm working on. And we'll select OK. And as it expands the selection, you'll see that that indeed has created a very small overlap now into the image area. And now we can come to the Edit menu, choose Fill, and from the Contents menu we're going to choose Content Aware and then select OK. And this is where you cross your fingers and hope that the ContentAware Phil will make a good job. Okay, occasionally you might find that ContentAware Phil has met its match, and you might need to do some manual extensions of image into this transparent area if you don't want to crop too tightly. One of the ways of avoiding the having to crop too tightly is actually using your camera in the portrait or vertical mode when capturing images for horizontal or panorama. And this gives you more area in the sky and foreground, so that we have to crop away less areas of transparency and cut with the risk of cutting into the image area that we actually want to preserve. Okay, I'll just collapse that panel and just take a look at what ContentAware Phil has done. I'll just do Command D or Control D on a PC in order to deselect. I actually really can't see where Photoshop has been working pretty much in the foreground. I suspect this rock in the immediate foreground is probably not part of the original composition. There's a little bit of patchy area in the sky. We could do some manual cloning in that area, or maybe I'll just crop a little bit tighter in this instance. Let's just come into that image area and I'll just crop beyond that rock down there in the foreground, and I'll commit that crop just by hitting that commit current crop operation icon in the options bar. Okay, so let's move into the next stage of the process here. It's done a pretty much seamless fix in the foreground, but I have noticed a small error on the horizon line. This the 5 images were captured on a camera on a regular tripod head, and there was no sort of offset to allow for what's called parallax error. And although Photoshop has managed to create a seamless stitch in the foreground, we do have a break in that distant information, which Photoshop has deprioritized. Okay, so let's just zoom in and take a close look at what's going on there at the horizon line, and you can see that the horizon line is not actually flat, and there's a small break in the horizon line at that point. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and fix this by making a selection just underneath where I believe the horizon line should be. Okay, I've got a feather radius of 0 pixels selected in the options bar, and I'm just coming to the left of this horizon line and then click and drag down. Okay, and now I'm going to try and position this selection but just below the lowest point on that break there. I can float this selection just by holding down the space bar before I let go of the mouse button, and I can move this higher or lower to the left or to the right. And just as I said, where the lowest point of that horizon or the break, just there in the center. Okay, I'm going to invert this selection, select, inverse, and then from the filter menu I'm going to come into Liquify. Okay, let's zoom in and take a look at the area we're about to modify. Okay, just come in one more time just for a closer look. Okay. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and push the area above this frozen area. Okay, the selection has become a frozen area inside of Liquify. Okay, that means that we can't actually push the pixels in this red masked area. Okay, I'm going to increase the brush size to around about 500 pixels, but lower the brush density and pressure to a lowly 20. I'm just going to, with the warp tool here in the top left, forward warp tool, I'm just coming above that horizon line and then clicking and dragging and pushing the pixels above that frozen area down onto, it's almost like pushing the pixels onto a table here, and just coming along and pushing down until all of that area above the horizon line is now sitting on that red masked area. Okay, just moving along. Okay, and I'm just pushing down, even though this is a very small error here, just keeping moving along for consistency. And I'll use the space bar and drag to the right, so I can access this other area on the right hand side of the horizon line. Sometimes you might need a second click and push in order to push all of that information down to the horizon line. And now that I'm comfortable, all of that information is sitting on the table, just one more click in the middle there, and I'll select OK. And as we can see, that pops down nicely onto that selection. Okay, I can lose that selection, Command or Control D to lose that selection, and we'll zoom in to take a look at the quality. Now what happens when you're working up against one of these frozen areas inside of Liquify, we tend to get an overly hard edge. Okay, and so we probably need to soften that edge up. I'll select the blur tool inside of the tools panel here, and we'll set the strength to 100% opacity. And with a reasonably small brush, I'll just click to one side of the horizon line, and then holding down the Shift key, I'll click on the other rock here, and that will create a sweep with the blur tool across that horizon line, just softening the edge up nicely. And just make sure that this area is done as well. One click. Okay, move to the other side, hold down the Shift key and click a second time, and that's created a nice transition. There is a very small break now left in that area, which we can fix using a patch. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the rectangular marquee tool. You can put a small amount of feather in, but we can also soften this just by masking it later. Here I'll just put a couple of pixels on that feather and make a small selection of an area that I want to add or float and place into that new location. So making that selection, I'll copy it to the clipboard, Command C on a Mac, Control C on a PC, and I'm going to paste this into its own new layer. So Command V on a Mac or Control V on a PC. I'm going to come up to the Move tool and now move this into position to hide that break. Okay, now we can do a rotation if we want to free transform. We can rotate that into position, but looks like it's got good alignment here. There are some small color differences, but we'll sort that out in the next step. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is come to the Layers panel, and I want to add a layer mask. I could rename this layer Patch, so I know what this empty layer or near empty layer is doing, and then click on the Add Layer Mask icon to add that layer mask. I'll select the brush tool from the Tools panel. I'm going to select a very soft brush, so we'll set the hardness value to 0%, and I'm going to raise the opacity here, perhaps to, I'll raise it to the full 100% if I want to work these edges. Okay, just coming around the edges and hiding those edges from view. Okay, and again coming across the top of the sky to return the original sky. We can now lower the opacity perhaps to 50% and just come in a little bit further on that in order to hide or create a smoother transition. Okay, if you've created a patch and that patch is the inappropriate color for the area you're working on, here we've only got a small color difference, just a little bit red here and a little bit cooler where the patch is. What I'm going to do is I'm going to select or sample the appropriate color. Just hold down the Alt or Option key if you've got the brush selected in order to take a sample. Now this ability to take a sample from this color will require that you've got the eyedropper tool set to all layers. Okay, and I'll just go back to the brush tool. This ensures that you get the color from the underlying layer. Okay, so I made that sample of the color. You can see it's gone into the foreground color swatch, and I'll just lower the opacity of this color to 50%, and I'll create a new layer for this color adjustment to go into. So I'll click on the Create a New Layer, and I'll set the blend mode of this layer to color, so that ensures that the tonality of the underlying layers remains. And now I can come in and paint at 50% and push that warmer color into the patch area that I've been working on, and so we really do get now a very seamless transition along that horizon line. Okay, Command 0 to fit in view or fit on screen. That pretty much is the panorama finished, but I've got a desire to add a little bit more HDR toning into this image to expand the contrast or detail in this image further. And so one of the ways I'm going to do that is I don't want to flatten this layer and apply it globally. I want to be in a position where I can add the HDR toning effect in a localized or a more subtle way. So we're going to come to the image menu and choose duplicate. Now you can only apply the HDR toning to a flattened layer, so I might as well duplicate the merged layers now, and I'll just rename this HDR and toning and select OK. Okay, so this is my new layer, and if you look at the layers panel, it is indeed flattened, which HDR toning will require. We're now free to come up to the image adjustments and select that HDR toning effect here. Okay, it's warning me that we will flatten the document. The reason this warning is probably coming forward is it was a named layer rather than the background layer, so I'll just click yes to proceed. Okay, and now I'm going to set in some settings. I'm not really interested in the color, I'm more interested in the tone that we're going to be creating. So I'm just going to lower that saturation down to a negative value so I can concentrate on the expanded detail. And here is the detail slider that I'm looking to grab, and there's the effect that I'm looking for. Perhaps not quite so strong as this, but we're going to blend this in to the underlying layer. We can get some benefit from moving these radius sliders just for a little bit more of a subtle effect. We could also try the smooth edges checkbox to create maybe a softer transition to those softer tones. And I'll just raise this strength perhaps to a 0.7 and the radius perhaps up to a value of around about 200. Okay, we're getting a little bit of clipping in there, so I'm just going to lower the exposure to a negative value. Okay, and this is the sort of effect that I'm looking to feed into the original panoramic image that I created. So I'll select OK. It's not the actually result that I'm looking for, but you'll see where I'm going with this project when I add this to the panorama that we've got sitting up in the tabs here. Okay, just another second or two and we have that finished. I'm now going to select the Move tool, or press V on the keyboard to select that Move tool, and I'm going to click and drag this to the tab holding the original panorama, and then just hold down the Shift key as I let go of the mouse in order to align the two layers. Okay, now we can come to the Layers panel, and what I'll do is I'll lower the opacity of this effect, perhaps down to 50% or so. And I'm also going to put this blend mode of this layer into luminosity. That restores the original color from the background layer here. Now I've noticed a few artifacts have been expanded in the sky. This was a result of that ContentAware Phil, which we didn't fix up entirely at that stage. So if I don't want that HDR toning to impact there, I can just add a layer mask and come in with a gradient tool, and we'll work at 100% opacity, and I could remove a lot of the HDR toning from the sky and leave it just working on the rocks there just by adding that gradient there through, creating a smoother sky and leaving the extra detail just in the rocks only. Okay, and that pretty much concludes the Photomerge tutorial.